We are now going to move on to talking specifically about one element of DM prep that I'm very, very fascinated to hear your thoughts on, because I want to talk about the Encounter Builder. You, of course, are the author of The Lazy Dungeon Master's Guide and Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. And you mentioned when we were talking before we planned to have you on that you have some specific things that you like or that you're interested in or that you do with the D&D Beyond Encounter Builder. So let's get into it. How do you, like, we talked about the 8 steps of DM prep for the Lazy Dungeon Master system. What about when it's time to actually put that into practice and put together some plans and maybe build some encounters?
Sure. So just for a little bit of backstory on this, I played D&D exclusively in person for all of the games that I ran until 18 months ago, at which point I switched from 100% in person to 100% online, and had never really run online games before, and was figuring out what that whole process was like and how to use it. And so we play over Discord as our primary tool to actually play D&D, with a lot of copying and pasting and some other tools here and there. And the Encounter Builder in Beyond, as you know, has gone through lots and lots of changes over this past 18 months, and kind of went from a tool that I didn't really use a whole lot to a tool that now is the primary way that I run encounters. And the reason, the big difference was shared dice rolling, like being able to roll dice in it, and being able to see other people's rolls. Made it from a tool that was like, well, it's kind of not exactly in the way, but just sort of something I might keep on the side, to like, now I use it. I use it regularly. And we used a lot of Avray, the Discord bot, right? And Avray is also a D&D Beyond tool, which is really cool, because it turns out Avray and the Encounter Builder work together now, right? And that was another really big change. But yeah, so I think I use the Encounter Builder slightly different than a lot of DMs, because I don't really plan my encounters ahead of time. I will do it for a boss fight, right? If I know that I've got a big fight coming up, a big specific fight coming up, I will build an encounter with that group in it, where you got like your boss and you got a few minions and you've got a couple big minions and a few small minions. But most of the time I let encounters happen naturally as the game is moving on, because while the characters are doing stuff, so are the monsters. And there's sort of 2 things that can change an encounter during the game. One is the monsters could be wandering around and going to different places. They're not all sitting in a room waiting for the players to show up. They're doing things too. But 2 is that the pacing of the game can be different. And it's like, if you just hammered the group with a big hard fight, and then they go down a hallway and open another door, you don't want to throw another big hard fight at them, right? It's just, it gets tiring, right? It's the Robin Laws in an excellent in an excellent book, not Robin's Laws, Hamlet's Hit Points, it's called. Really a great book. Talks about this oscillating pace of upward and downward beats. You want good things to happen and bad things, and good things and bad things and good things, and you want to keep that pace moving, in different directions. Too many good beats and it gets really boring, and that's like, it's not hard. Too many bad beats and you're just frustrated and tired. So you want to be moving up and down, and you don't know what that oscillation is going to be like when you're running it, right? You don't know what it's going to be like while you're prepping it. You only know when you're running it, whether or not turns out things were much harder than I thought, which means you're going to change your encounters, right? And a common example I go with is like, you're in a hobgoblin fortress, sneaking around trying to grab their plans to invade a nearby city. And you open a door, and it's like, if they just had a really easy time getting there, they kick open the door and there's 14 hobgoblins practicing their defensive phalanx maneuver, right? And you're like, uh-oh, right? This is a bad room to fall into. But if you've been having a really hard go and your rolls have been low and they've been struggling, they open it up and they see 2 drunken hobgoblins, passed out over a dice game, right? And that changes the encounter. Now, the nice thing is that the speed of the Encounter Builder and Beyond is so high that I can change those encounters while I'm playing. I can very quickly say, I just want a couple of hobgoblins, bang, bang, couple of hobgoblins, characters are already in there, hit go, and off we go. Or if I need to scale things up, I can very easily add it. So probably 70 or 80% of the time, I'm using the encounter builder to build encounters while I'm running the game. And 20% of the time, I actually prep an encounter in the builder. Usually I will do them if I know where the game is going to start. I will prep an encounter there, right? I'll say I know that my characters are in the middle of a room and all of the shadows are going to animate and attack them. So I'm going to need 6 shadows, and I'll build an encounter for that. And if I know I've got a boss fight where it's like, okay, I've got an arch nemesis and I've got their minions and all that, I will add that up and have that ready. But a lot of the other ones I just build as I go, and luckily the tool is flexible enough to do so. The other big change is having initiative in there, right? That before it took a while for it to grow on me. I was using Avray for initiative because Avray, I actually wrote an Avray macro that knew what the initiative bonuses were for all the characters, and I had sort of a generic initiative spot for monsters, and then I would just execute this macro in Discord, and it would roll for everybody, and then give you a block and say, here's what initiative was. And the problem is that players were always really happy with it when it rolled high and believed that was just and good, but then would argue about how I rolled badly for them when their initiative was low. And you're like, you can't have it both. Like, hey, I didn't roll. Some random number generator somewhere else in the world rolled, but every time I'd get an argument about that. So it's like they want to roll initiative. And now that initiative is kind of wired into the encounter builder, and I guess it's still the encounter builder, right? Even though you're running an encounter from it. Now it's got initiative.
Yeah, so there's the encounter builder and then the combat tracker, which is the builder is available for everybody in beta, and then the combat tracker right now is subscriber early access because it's still alpha. There's still lots of things to come, and they're working on lots of cool stuff for it.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I'm kind of using both, and where one and having been in that cool alpha group I know for all this time, they blend together for me very quickly because I think it's one button, right? Like it's the launch,
run encounter,
right? Yeah, the run encounter button.
Yeah,
and you run that, and next thing you know, you're off to the races. So I've really found I've found that integration, and then with the combat the log, right? The combat log. That's really interesting. The other thing is so when I was in this sort of the earliest days of COVID, and even though I'm not discounting at all how horrible this has been across the entire world, it was an opportunity for me to learn a new way to play D&D. And it was an opportunity for me to help other people learn how to play D&D. So I took it really as I'm experimenting with stuff. I'm trying stuff, and then I'm explaining, I'm trying to write articles and do videos and everything else. And those have been very popular. Some of my most popular articles are how to play D&D over Discord and, all these other things. And back then there was a lot.
Person making that transition at that same
time.
Right,
everybody was doing it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But luckily, people already knew to come to my site for some stuff. So I was like, well, let me help with this transition. And I think it was really, really important, especially then, having the opportunity to sit down with our friends and have a good time was even more important than it normally is. And it's important all the time. So I felt like it was vital to really understand this transition. And at the time, so it's a lot of Avray and Discord integration and how all of that worked. And Avray is really, really cool and a really powerful tool. It's got a pretty steep learning curve, though, right? There's a lot going on in Avray. And the interesting thing is, one major transition was the minute that the combat tracker was able to pass information to Avray, right? That you could connect. And I think this is a relatively recent thing. I think this just happened in the last few weeks, that you can now connect your campaign up through Discord and through Avray. And when you're rolling in Beyond, it then passes it to Discord, which is great. That before it was people would have to roll using Avray in Discord, or I still have friends that just roll dice on their table and say what they got, which is absolutely great. I don't, they should roll. I never checked their rolls when they were at my table. I'm not going to check them now, right? It's fine. But people like to see other people's rolls. And the interesting thing is now, so I kept changing my articles about how to get all this stuff integrated. And now it's I still like Avray, but I don't know if you need it as much. because everybody can now see the roles in the log. Everybody's in D&D Beyond anyway, because they're all looking at their character sheets. When they're in their character sheets, they have the log in there. It's sort of like just having a different channel to go look at the roles, but you don't have to have them go into Discord. Now all you need is like a video chat, right? So I really found that it just, as soon as it made these couple of little leaps, it's become significantly more useful and really has changed, really has changed how I play online.
I'm maybe already plotting to clip out all of these and send them to our incredibly talented and hardworking programmers to be like, look, this is what all of your card
including the operate guy. I know I just said you don't need operate. It's still really cool.
I will say, cool. For me, as someone, like, I love in-person play. I miss in-person play. But like being able to see each other's roles, I didn't realize how big a difference that would make, because the collective table response to something, I didn't think I was checking everybody's roles every time. I don't know what you got on that stealth check, but everyone simultaneously knows that went quite well or quite badly emotional response.
Yep.
Turns out is a big element. Let's build.
Yeah, it's like those moments where boom, you just kind of like, you're saying, if I roll a 12, this is gonna hit you, and you're already at like 4 HP, and you just throw that die in the middle of the table, and like everybody gets excited. That's what that game log does for me, and I'm like, that's what I've been missing, like in not playing in person.
Yeah.
But let's dive into it and build. And one other thing.
No, I was just we could talk about the fact that it's got the encounter difficulty wired into it as well, which is a really nice feature, because trying to calculate that by that in hand and using the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide is a challenging experience, and honestly doesn't come out with the most accurate answer anyway.
I even struggle with just adding my dice numbers. I don't want to do all that dividing and multiplying.
Subtraction is already
hard
enough.
I love that.
Yeah.
Let's go build an encounter. Right? We can kind of show this off.
Yes, absolutely. Sure, and that principle of Beyond essentially is like, if you like the math, you can always do the math, but now it's optional. And I do love that about these tools. Mellie, what should we build today to show off our example encounter?
What level are our characters?
Yeah, so I went in, we got our managed characters over here. So there's some presets in here. If you've got a campaign set up, you can also click a campaign and it will load in the characters of that level. This is a blank account here, so I just picked for level 5, if that sounds good to everybody.
Yeah, I have one little tip here that I picked up. So if you have players, I have one player who doesn't use Beyond. I know it's terrible, but doesn't use Beyond. He likes his pen and paper character sheet, and he does it that way. You can still, what I did is I still created a character for him in the campaign. And then I just increased the level. I didn't bother giving him all the abilities and everything like that. It's just, he has that level. And that way I have a placeholder for him inside the encounter builder, and a placeholder that goes into the combat tracker for initiative and stuff like that. So you can sort of make a dummy character for if somebody is playing and they don't have a character inside Beyond or inside the campaign and Beyond. It works really well.
And I will note, because occasionally we find that people still are not aware of this, if you want to, you can make your character and just export it to PDF and print it out. That is an option you have if you'd like to have the paper in your hand. It doesn't mean you can't look things up, and I don't think I can live without that anymore. But
yeah. Yep.
Yes, as we were talking, you said, hey.
So what level are the characters?
5.
4 level 5 characters.
And
while we were talking, you just had said that thing about, hey, there's 14 hobgoblins, or maybe there's 2. So I just started to fill in a thing with 14 hobgoblins. So if you want to build something else, you guys tell me, I will drive.
Another thought I'll throw out there, which is, it's always, and I've gotten this from lots and lots of D&D designers over the years too, so this isn't unique, but starting with the story, I think is really important. That's before, I think that there's this sort of paint by numbers approach that a lot of people take of like, let me go start by looking at monsters that are the roughly right challenge rating before I build an encounter, and then build the story from that. And instead it's like, well, where are they and what ecology are they in? And instead of starting by mathematically figuring out what monsters they should fight, it often works to say, what's the story? Where you bring up, like, okay, they're in the Hobgoblin Fortress, right? Now, typically, a group of 5th level characters inside of a Hobgoblin Fortress, it's going to be, they're pretty tough, right? 5th level is that real big transition point for characters where they go from burgeoning heroes to like, no, we can kill trolls. So yeah, you're gonna need, there could be a lot of hobgoblins in this place, right? It wouldn't be out of hand for them to face a dozen hobgoblins in a single fight. So yeah.
So thinking about setting that way, I do love like the terrain button is one of my favorite brainstorm tools, where I'm just like, what monsters am I not thinking of? And then it's just like, who lives in a swamp? And you can just sort of
that's great.
look around like it's a nature
I didn't know
guide.
about that one. I'm learning
Environment,
things today.
yeah, boom. Setting that to swamp. I also found I ran a one shot that was like took place. They were transferred to this like celestial judgment realm, and I was like, I need lawful good enemies, so I can filter just lawful good creatures and start to build from there, because that's not usually something you think about. It's like, all right, they're gonna fight some angels. What do those look like? I haven't used them in ever.
Right.
And Mellie, correct me if I'm wrong, but your encounter builder options, it's going to show you all of the options or ones that you have unlocked?
Oh, that is a good question. I think that it shows you everything, and then if you opened this and you didn't have it, it would tell you that you could go and purchase that source. But I believe it will show you kind of everything in the list, and then if you opened it up and you didn't have it, it will say, hey, you got to go buy this one.
Yeah, but it looks like you can filter
and you
down
can
by
also
source.
change that.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
you can filter by source. You can just mark stuff you do have, so you only see that stuff. There's tons of filters like size, armor class, average hit points, movement type, resistances. Like you can really get really granular.
Oh yeah, I've never looked at these advanced filters. I want all the monsters with blind sight.
Rabbit hole.
In complete darkness.
Ooh.
That's an interesting approach. Like the setting that would that would be right for all of those, monsters to arise would make for some fun challenges. Mellie, what'd you find?
Here's some blind sight and swamp monsters.
Blind swamp monsters. Falcorn Grimm in the chat brought up something that I think is really important, which is reskinning is such a powerful tool. And your take your orcs and your ogres and your giants and reskin them. I like orcs and ogres and giants as a reskinnable because they're pretty simple monsters, and you can flavor them in so many ways, right? There's so many different ways you can take a base monster and completely change it, make like a troll that's a fire troll, right? This one is, the exact opposite of your ice troll, right? And there's so many different ways you can sort of change up a monster.
That's a great. What would you do with a giant? What's a fun spin on a giant?
So I often will take use giant stat blocks to mimic evil heroes or anti-heroes. So like if you have the barbarian champion who's there, and maybe they're we'll stick with our Rime of the Frostbane theme, like a champion of Oral, right? Who's this like Reged barbarian champion who has been worshipping Oral and is filled with Oral's power. You can take a frost giant and just say it's a barbarian, but he basically has the stats of a frost giant, right? Or even bigger, if you really want somebody tough. So the cool. Giant stat blocks work really well as simple, powerful anti-heroes. I love them for that. Ogres too. I reskin ogres all the time. Ogres are such great monsters. Low, they have low AC, so you hit them all the time. They have high hit points, so they survive, and when they hit you, you really feel it.
So we haven't added anything to our encounter yet, right?
Nope, not yet.
Let's
see. Do we like our hobgoblin idea?
Yeah, so right now I've filtered it by swamp and blind sight. We can go and let's head inside. We can head inside somewhere too. I kind of like this enormous tentacle from Acquisitions Incorporated is kind of fun. Building an encounter around that could be fun because it's just a swamp and then boom, there's a tentacle that you have to deal with, and then we can add other things. The tentacle's
probably tied to something. Yeah, where'd that tentacle come from? That's probably one monster of a group of monsters that turn into some big thing.
Right, so if you add that, then for folks, if folks haven't used this before, now that you've added that monster, it's going to automatically show you if you use XP-based progression as opposed to milestone. It's going to show you how that lands. It's going to do the math. Shouldn't be a multiplier yet because there's only one creature, but if you have a whole bunch of creatures, it's going to adjust that math for you, and then it's going to try to guess how easy or hard this is going to be for your party. Just if you haven't used the encounter builder before, it's going to give you an estimate of how this might go for your party of 4 5th level adventurers.
You probably want to underline that might. Yeah, that it's really I've been talking to lots of DMs and again reading many DMs, they hang on. A lot of DMs hang on too tightly to that difficulty, that they, you know, they expect that you know, an easy fight is always going to be an easy, a deadly fight's always going to be deadly, and it's like, it's not the case. And in fact, certainly as you get to like 5th level and above, you know, deadly is often not deadly. You know, I've run battles that were twice deadly and still not deadly, right? Like player
were any
character,
of the fights where people suddenly flew away from the entire fight, a la the fourth edition story you were telling us earlier?
Sure, yeah, or boy, they just,
and well,
they
you
just
also have to
out.
keep in mind, like, you know, the suggested is like 6 or 8 encounters a day, and I find most campaigns usually have, you know,
they never
2 or 3, so it really changes what that deadly level is. I pretty much make all of my encounters deadly because I usually just have one in a session.
I'll tell you,
that's
though,
gonna be
one
the
big
one.
fight.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I am a huge fan of the easy encounter, and often because it doesn't turn into a fight all the time. But like when you have your group of 5th level characters, and they go into to those 2 drunken hobgoblins, right? It could turn into a fight, but it could be really easy. I had a fight where 5 5th level characters were having an argument about what to do outside of a cave full of gnolls, and they were arguing about something that had nothing to even do with this. And then they look, and there's a gnoll standing there watching them, right? Like watching them fight. And, you know, and then the gnoll's like, oh, and like turns around to run, right? Because he realized that, oh, they saw me. And it was like a really stressful fight, because like, we got to stop that gnoll before he gets in there and alerts the other 30, right? And so these really small, you know, like 2 bandits in the woods, right? Like when you have an encounter where the characters are trying to sneak up, and it doesn't matter how powerful they are, and there's 2 bandits standing there that don't see them, and they're talking and they're having a conversation, you've created this moment where like you really get to see what the players bring to the table by how they're going to interact with those 2 bandits, right? And maybe they do just go up and stab them, and that's the end of that, right? But maybe they're like, let's try to trick them into thinking we're the boss, or, you know, let's just sneak around them, like let's just ignore these bandits. There's all these different approaches that can be taken that tend to come up when the battle is not a big hard fight.
I love that. Looking for
I really
other
like
kinds
oscillating them. Yeah, I really like oscillating the difficulties of fights.
That's great advice. Because I think what you would, just to underline what you're already saying there, you've found ways that fight or potential combat situations can also be problem-solving situations, can also be story situations, or you can find other ways to give stakes to how this fight goes, other than will you physically kill them or will they physically kill you. Give other consequences that could attach to success or failure when you encounter that obstacle. Is great creative DM thinking.
Yeah, and it gets to that idea that like, I'm going to throw a number out there, I don't know if it's true, but like maybe half the fights might not be fights, right? That like there's you don't know what exactly is going to happen, and if you think you know, then you're hanging on to it. And if you're hanging on too tight and the characters do something creative, you might shut it down, and that's not always a great approach, right? It's probably not a great approach most of the time. So if you go in with like, here's what I think. You know, here's what I think might happen, or I know that there's a bunch of hobgoblins hanging out in this fort, and I know they have hellhounds, and I know they've hired a couple of ogre mercenaries, and I know that there's one bandit captain, or one hobgoblin bandit, or one hobgoblin captain, right? You can then sort of space them out and decide which ones show up where at any given time, and they're not all going to necessarily turn into a fight, right? They might turn into a fight, and if they do, you're ready for it, right? And if they don't, they don't. One other cool thing about using the encounter builder is you don't have to just use it for a single encounter. You can actually just use it to kind of bookmark a bunch of monsters that you might use in different ways, right? And like the difficulty thing doesn't work at that point because you're filling it up with stuff. And you might only have one monster in there, even though there's 30 of them, right? Just because you only need the one list. But it's kind of a handy way to say, like, you know, here are all of the monsters that might be in the Hobgoblin Fortress in one big list. And then keep that as an encounter, but it's not one encounter, it's a whole location. And then you're just keeping them on hand so that you have all the stat blocks handy when the characters run into them. So that's another way that I've used it. That's probably not how it was intended, but works pretty well.
I love it. Especially, I think now one of the options that is available, just because Save and Resume just came out. So now you can actually like leave your encounter in the middle, go and edit it, like take out a monster, and then go back into it, which I find really life-saving because I do like to change things last minute.
I haven't tried that yet. I saw you guys when you were talking about it, and I was like, oh, I gotta see what that is, right? Because now I'm on board. Like now that I'm using it as often as I'm using, like every new change, I'm like, oh, tell me more about that, right? Like I want to figure that out. So.
Well, thank you so much. And Mellie, you just demonstrated while we were going through that, hitting that run button, putting in some initiatives, and showing like that you can use once you get into the combat tracker side of it, which is still in alpha, showing how that goes and keeping track of things during a fight. More tools that once we start using them, we don't know how we did without.
It is right. I was gonna say it's an alpha, but it's a strong alpha, right? Like I'm using it all the time. And it works fine. So, I don't know what the difference is between beta and alpha in this circumstance, but all I know is it's working really well.
The aforementioned hardworking programmers are like, we know the difference. We're fixing. But it looks great to us, so thank you.
Somewhere on a Kanban board, I'm sure they're figuring it out, right? But I don't know, and I'm happy.
And I'm very happy that we were able to have you come join us today. Obviously, I want to talk to you forever about more DM insights, but where can people find more of this good advice and your perspective on Dungeons & Dragons, Mike Shea?
So the best place is to go to slyflourish.com. You go to that website and all my other stuff is there. All the other places. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can check out my YouTube videos. You can check out my books. You can hang out my Discord. You can read my nonsense on Twitter. Whatever you want to do, it's all available on slyflourish.com.
Grab the any award-winning return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and learn all of the things. I especially love that, like, as someone else who's been playing for a long time, you have a lot of insight, but you don't, like, hate new versions of things. So I just personally love that.
Yep.
And
always be learning.
Yeah. I'm so glad you were able to join us, and we will see you next time on D&D Beyond.
It's D&D.